It was a rainy Tuesday morning in July 1995 when the world quietly shifted for the Jennings family, though no one knew it at the time. The gray clouds hung low over St. Luke's Medical Center in small-town Illinois as thunder rumbled in the distance. Inside the maternity ward, Abigail Jennings, 34, clutched her husband's hand with the kind of fierce hope that only comes after years of heartbreak. She had lost 3 pregnancies before this one, all at different stages, each loss taking a part of her with it, but now, she was about to deliver her miracle. 3 little girls who had survived the odds, growing inside her against every doctor's warning. Her husband Mark had tears in his eyes as they wheeled her into the delivery room. "They're coming, Abby," he whispered, squeezing her hand. "You did it. We're finally here." And just like that, in the early hours of July 18th, the triplets were born, 2 minutes apart, each small but breathing, blinking, and alive. Nurses bustled around with practiced rhythm. The first girl had a faint red mark on her temple. The second had a loud cry that filled the room like thunder. The third was quiet, staring up with dark, curious eyes. Abigail named them Rose, Lily, and Grace. They were swaddled and taken to the neonatal care wing, just a few floors down, for monitoring. It was standard for preemies. Abigail had only held each of them for a few seconds, just long enough to feel their warmth on her chest, just long enough for it to feel real. Then the nightmare began. By noon, one of the nurses told Mark to wait outside the recovery room. There had been a minor issue, she said. One of the babies wasn't responding well to the oxygen support. Abigail sat up in bed, weak but alert, panic rising in her voice. But the nurse was calm, assuring her everything was under control. An hour passed, then 2. By 3 p.m., 2 security officers were standing outside Abigail's room. A doctor came in, his voice shaking, clipboard in hand, and told her that something unprecedented had occurred. The triplets were gone. Abigail didn't understand. "Gone?" she asked. "What do you mean, gone? Taken where?" "To another hospital." "What are you talking about?" The doctor didn't answer directly. He kept repeating how sorry he was, how the police were now involved. A nurse brought in a detective, a tall man with tired eyes, who gently began to ask Abigail questions. She couldn't comprehend. Had she noticed anyone suspicious? Had she given anyone permission to remove the babies? "No," she cried. "They were just born. I barely held them. They were in the nursery. They were safe. But they weren't. Somehow, in a hospital with security cameras and protocols, 3 newborn girls had vanished without a trace. Not 1, not 2, but all 3. The hospital locked down. The news spread fast, first through the town, then across the state. "Triple infant kidnapping shocks Illinois," the headline screamed. The next morning, TV trucks lined up outside St. Luke's. Reporters circled like hawks, desperate for answers, but no one had any. There were no leads. No surveillance footage showed anything unusual. The nursery doors had no forced entry. The nurses all said they had been following routine. No stranger had been seen in the ward. No alarms triggered. It was as if the babies had simply evaporated. Mark and Abigail were destroyed. She refused to leave the hospital for 2 days, sitting in her gown, rocking back and forth in the empty nursery, staring at the 3 tiny bassinets. She kept calling out their names, Rose, Lily, Grace's. If she said them enough, they'd answer. But silence was all she got. And just like that, the world moved on. For months, the story stayed on the evening news. There were community vigils, reward money, tips that led nowhere. One witness claimed to have seen a woman in scrubs carrying a duffel bag out a side exit, but no evidence supported it. Another said they heard crying from a staff locker room, but that lead fizzled too. Years passed. The case grew cold. The hospital changed management. The nursery was renovated. Security systems upgraded. Abigail and Mark tried to rebuild, but the kind of hole left by 3 stolen children is not something time fills. Abigail stopped working. Mark changed jobs. They never had more children. Each year on July 18th, she lit 3 candles and placed them by the window, in the hope that, somewhere, somehow, her girls might see the light. In 2015, exactly 20 years later, Abigail received a call from a number she didn't recognize. It was a hospice nurse named Cheryl. Her voice trembled with age and fear. "I don't know if you remember me, Mrs. Jennings," she said, "but I worked at St. Luke's back in '95. I need to talk to you. It's about your daughters." Abigail froze. She hadn't heard those words, "your daughters," in a very long time. "I'm dying," the nurse said softly. "I can't live with it anymore. There's something I never told the police. I think you deserve to know the truth before I go." Abigail couldn't speak. Her hand trembled against her cheek. She looked at the photo that still sat on her mantel. 3 pink bracelets from the hospital labeled Rose, Lily, Grace, lying side by side. And for the first time in years, her heart beat with something new. Drilled. Cheryl asked to meet in person. She didn't want to talk over the phone. She said she had written everything down in a sealed envelope. "You can read it after I explain," she whispered, "but you need to prepare yourself. What I know changes everything, Abigail called. Mark immediately. He dropped the phone. Later that evening, they drove to the hospice center, room 216. The hall smelled of antiseptic and sadness. The nurse lay propped up on pillows, a yellowing photograph clutched in her hand. When she looked at Abigail, her eyes filled with something deeper than guilt. She said, only 5 words. They were never really gone. Abigail's knees went weak the moment she heard those words. They were never really gone. She reached for the edge of the hospital bed as if to steady herself, her knuckles pale. Mark stood behind her, frozen, his eyes locked on Cheryl, the nurse whose name neither of them had remembered until that night. The room was quiet except for the slow beep of a monitor, a soft rhythmical reminder that time was slipping away, both Cheryl's and theirs. I've carried this for 20 years, Cheryl said, her voice paper thin. Every day, every night, and now I need to get it out before it goes with me. Abigail lowered herself into the chair beside the bed. Her eyes were swollen, red, and filled with something deeper than grief, something sharper hope laced with fear. Cheryl opened the drawer of her bedside table and took out a weathered envelope. It was sealed and slightly stained at the corners. She placed it gently in Abigail's hand. Don't open it until I'm done, please. Abigail nodded slowly. I was a junior nurse back then, Cheryl began, still on night shifts. I wasn't supposed to be in the nursery that morning, but another nurse called out. I was there when they brought your girls in. I remember how tiny they were, how beautiful. Her eyes flickered toward the window, then back. Something was off that day. There was a woman. She wasn't one of ours. Wore scrubs, yes, but I didn't recognize her. She said she was there from pediatrics. Said she'd been asked to help monitor the triplets. She even signed the logbook. Mark leaned in, his voice tight. But there wasn't anyone else assigned, was there? Cheryl shook her head. That's the thing. I didn't question it. Nurses move between units sometimes, especially when staffed. But an hour later, I went on my break. When I came back, she was gone, and so were the babies. The words sat in the room like smoke, thick, choking. I didn't know what to do, Cheryl said. I told the floor supervisor, but by the time anyone reacted, it was too late. The security footage, it was already wiped. Someone high up, took control of the situation. They shut down any questions, and then they told us all to keep our mouths shut. Wait, what do you mean wiped? Abigail asked. They erased it, Cheryl said, or replaced it. I don't know, but it was gone. And then this man from the board came in. He said the story would be that the babies were taken in a security breach, and that was it. No one questioned it. I tried to say something once, to a reporter, but 2 days later, I got a letter saying I'd be fired, blacklisted. I had a young son at the time. I didn't know what to do, so I stayed quiet. She looked down at her hands, brittle and shaking. But that's not all. Abigail's heart thudded in her chest. She reached for Mark's hand without thinking. His grip was cold. I saw the woman again, Cheryl whispered. Not long after, maybe 2 weeks later, at a rest stop just outside of Rockford. She wasn't in scrubs then. She was in plain clothes, had a baby carrier, just one. I followed her into the restroom. She looked me in the eye and smiled. Then she said, they're safe now. They'll never know. Abigail gasped. You didn't call the police? I tried, Cheryl said, but when I described her, they said it didn't match anyone in the system. They said I was seeing things, that I was confused. I started to wonder if maybe I was. She paused to breathe, her eyes welling with tears. But I'm not confused now, and I wasn't then. That woman had your babies, or at least one of them. Abigail opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside were 3 things: a photocopy of the original nursery logbook, a newspaper clipping from 1996 showing a woman arrested for child endangerment in a nearby county, and a handwritten note from Cheryl. I think she was working with someone inside. It read, I think the babies were split up. One stayed with her. The others, I don't know. But someone in that hospital helped her, someone with power, someone who could make it all disappear. For a long time, no one spoke. Mark broke the silence. Do you remember what she looked like? Cheryl nodded. She had dark hair, pale skin, a scar on her chin. She walked with a slight limp. I could draw her face if you gave me a pencil. The next morning, Abigail and Mark took everything to the sheriff's office. A new detective was assigned to reopen the case, Detective Harlan Reed, a former FBI profiler who'd returned to the county to retire early. He had silver hair, a worn leather satchel, and eyes that didn't miss much. I've read the original case file, he said, laying the folder on the table. It's thinner than it should be, sloppy, incomplete. Your nurse's confession is the first real movement we've had in 20 years. Abigail pulled out the clipping Cheryl had given her. This woman, she was arrested in '96 for abandoning a child in a grocery store parking lot. Charges were dropped, but doesn't she look like the one Cheryl described? Ree leaned forward. She does, and the arrest was only 12 miles from St. Luke's. They began to dig. Ree cross-referenced hospital records, board members, nursing staff anyone who had access in 1995, but nearly half were retired, dead, or unreachable. Files were missing. Computer logs had been purged in a system update a decade earlier. The case was like a maze where the exits kept changing, but Cheryl had given them one last name, a supervisor who had signed off on the stranger that day. Helen Madsen, former head nurse, now living in a retirement home outside Bloomington. When Abigail and revisited her, the old woman answered the door with a vacant smile. She had Alzheimer's, barely remembered her own birthday. But when Reed gently showed her the logbook, something strange happened. She pointed at the forged name, Tessa Ray, and said, clear as day, that wasn't her real name. Then she closed her eyes, and that was it. The name was a lie. Whoever took the triplets had done so with a stolen identity. Abigail stared at the logbook for hours that night. She traced the forged name over and over, whispering to herself, Tessa Ray. Then something clicked. She remembered the last name from a letter she'd once received, a thank you card from a nurse after her prenatal checkup, months before the birth, signed T. Ray. It had been buried in a box somewhere in her attic. They found it, and the handwriting matched. Abigail sat at her dining table past midnight, surrounded by yellowed newspaper clippings, faded photographs, and the now unsealed envelope from Cheryl. A single lamp cast a pool of light on the table, everything else cloaked in shadow. The house was silent, except for the ticking of the old wall clock. For the first time in decades, her grief had movement. It wasn't just pain anymore. It was direction. A trail, however cold and fragmented, had emerged, and she was ready to follow it. Mark came downstairs, rubbing sleep from his eyes. You haven't moved, he said quietly. I remembered something, she whispered. That thank you card from my checkup. Look. She slid it across the table. Signed T. Ray. The handwriting, it's the same. He stared at the card. Abigail didn't need to convince him. He had lived with the same ache, the same hollow birthdays, the same empty nursery. He just hadn't expected the pain to take shape again after 20 years. The next morning, they met with Detective Reed. Again, at the sheriff's department, he had brought in a forensic document analyst, an older woman with sharp glasses and a quiet precision. After examining both samples under magnification and comparing stroke patterns, she looked up and said, it's a match. I'd say 95% certainty. Same hand wrote both. That thank you note, Reed said slowly, must have come from someone who had access to your prenatal appointments. That narrows it down. I'll pull the logs from Dr. Langston's office records, if they still exist. They did barely old paper files, scanned and stored after the clinic shut down in 2003. Reed, with the help of a records clerk, dug out a file labeled Tessa Rern, who had worked as a float nurse in 1995. Not Tessa Ray, Tessa Rern. 2 months in the OB/GYN department, just before the triplets were born, then transferred, then nothing, Reed said. She disappears from medical employment records after September of that year. No tax filings, no nursing license renewals. It's like she vanished. Abigail clenched her jaw. She didn't vanish. She changed her name. Reed looked up. I think you're right. Using that lead, they requested Social Security and DMV records. The process took time. It was nearly 3 weeks before Reed returned with a narrowed list of women born in the 60s or 70s, named Tessa Rern, or variations of it. Only one had ever worked in healthcare, and she had lived under a new name since 1996, Teresa Radley, currently residing in rural Indiana. Abigail's stomach flipped when she saw the address list and 2 hours away. Reed advised caution. We don't have enough to accuse anyone of anything, but if she's involved, she's been hiding for 20 years. That kind of person doesn't usually talk easily. Abigail didn't care. She wanted to see the woman's face. They drove out. That weekend, Teresa Radley lived on a quiet stretch of road near the edge of a faded town. Her house was modest, peeling paint, a rusted swing set in the backyard. No car in the driveway. The curtains were drawn. Reed approached first, flashing his badge through the screen door. A middle-aged woman answered, worn, pale, tired-looking. Her hands trembled when she opened the door. Yes, Mrs. Radley. Reed asked. We're looking into a cold case from Illinois, St. Luke's Hospital, July 1995. Do you remember working there? She didn't speak. Her lips parted slightly, then closed again. Her eyes darted to Abigail, then Mark. I don't know what you're talking about, she said softly. We believe you used to go by Tessa Rern. Reed continued gently. We just need to ask a few questions. Her voice cracked. I've already told them everything. Reed raised an eyebrow. Told who? She blinked. The people from before, years ago, after the arrest. Reed stepped forward. What arrest? She didn't answer. Abigail's voice broke the silence. Do you know who I am? Teresa looked straight at her. Yes, she said quietly, definitively. I know exactly who you are. Mark stepped forward. Then tell us where our daughters are. Teresa's lip trembled. I only had one. The air turned to stone. I didn't take them all. I swear. There were others. I was told to take just one and disappear. I didn't even know why at the time. I didn't even know who she was. They said it was to protect her, that she was in danger. I was supposed to care for her until they came back, but they never did. Ree's voice was calm but firm. Who told you that? Teresa's eyes filled with tears. It was a woman. She worked in administration. I don't know her real name. She called herself Catherine. She paid me in cash, gave me a fake ID, a new car, and told me I'd be safe if I stayed quiet. Abigail's voice was a whisper. Where's the girl? Teresa hesitated, then pointed toward the backyard. She's inside. Her name's Ellie now. She's in college. She doesn't know anything. She thinks I adopted her after her mother died in childbirth. I've never told her the truth. Never told anyone. Abigail began to cry softly, painfully. Mark reached for her, but his own eyes were glassy. Teresa opened the door wider. You want to see her? No, Ree said immediately. Not yet. Not like this. Teresa nodded slowly, as if relieved. They didn't meet Ellie that day. Instead, Ree returned with a court liaison and social worker 2 days later. DNA tests were ordered. Teresa agreed to everything without a lawyer, without protest. When the results came in, it was undeniable. Ellie Radley was Rose Jennings, one of the triplets, alive. Abigail sat in silence when she read the report. Not joy, not shock, just silence. A lifetime of questions suddenly narrowed into one thin truth. At least one of her daughters had lived. She was real. She was out there breathing, walking, speaking, laughing. But where were the other two? Ellie didn't cry when they told her the truth. She sat still, her eyes wide, lips slightly parted, her fingers twisting the hem of her sweater, again and again, the same way she used to fidget as a little girl. Teresa had said. Abigail sat across from her, her heart pounding louder than she thought possible, watching this young woman who had her cheekbones, her husband's hazel eyes, and an expression that looked almost exactly like the one she'd seen in the mirror 20 years ago, the night her babies vanished. I don't know what to say, Ellie whispered finally. I don't even know what I'm supposed to feel. Abigail didn't move any closer. She didn't want to scare her. You don't have to feel anything right now, she said softly. This isn't something anyone's prepared for. I just want you to know you were always loved. From the very first second, you were wanted. Mark sat beside his wife, hands clasped, knuckles tight. He hadn't spoken in minutes. Ellie turned to Teresa. You lied to me. I know, Teresa, said her voice cracking. I didn't know how to undo it. I told myself it was for your safety, that if they ever found you, they'd take you from me. I didn't know who they were anymore. I just kept running with that fear. But you're not my real mother, Ellie said. Her voice didn't shake. It was strangely steady. No, Teresa said, tears falling down her cheeks. But I've loved you like you were. Did you steal me? Ellie asked. Teresa looked down. No, I didn't break in. I didn't do the taking. I was used. I was scared. I was manipulated, but I still said yes. I still took you away, and I'll live with that forever. Ellie didn't say anything else. She just got up and walked out of the room. Abigail started to follow her, but stopped. She knew that kind of pain, the kind that needed solitude to breathe. The days that followed were a blur of legal meetings, interviews, and press silence. The Jennings refused to speak to the media. They weren't interested in attention. They were trying to piece together a future with a daughter they'd only just met, and a mystery that was far from solved. Ellie agreed to meet again, this time at Abigail and Mark's home. She walked through the front door hesitantly, her backpack slung over one shoulder. Abigail had cleaned the living room 3 times that morning, adjusted the throw pillows, rearranged the photo frames. She felt foolish for caring about such things, but then again, this was her daughter's first time in the house that had always been hers without her knowing it. Ellie wandered through the hallway, stopped at a photo of Abigail and Mark's wedding. Another of them, in 1993, grinning beside a Christmas tree. You both look the same, she said softly. Abigail smiled gently. We feel about 100 years older. Ellie turned. Do you know what happened to the others? Abigail shook her head. Not yet, but we will. That night, after Ellie left, Detective recalled. His voice was urgent. We might have something, he said. That second article you found, about the woman arrested in 1996 for child endangerment. Her name was Laura Koenig. I dug into her background. She used to work part-time at a private birthing clinic that shut down in '97. Guess who the head of staff was? Abigail's pulse quickened. Who? Catherine Walsh. It's a long shot, but I think that's your Catherine. The woman Teresa mentioned. Abigail sat up straighter. Do you know where she is? She moved out of state in 2001, retired, bought a cabin in upstate New York under her maiden name. I'm flying out tomorrow. Abigail didn't hesitate. We're coming with you. The next morning, the 3 of them boarded a flight to Albany. Ree had already called ahead to the local sheriff's office for assistance. Catherine's cabin was secluded, tucked deep into the Catskills past gravel roads and rows of bare trees. It was the kind of place meant to be forgotten. When they knocked, no one answered, but a dog barked somewhere in the back. Ree stepped around the porch, then froze. Abigail, Mark, you need to see this. They followed. Behind the cabin was a narrow garden, overgrown and wild, but past it, under a small tin-roofed shed, sat a rusting metal crib covered in ivy. Next to it, an old wooden rocking horse, both rotting from years of exposure. Abigail felt like she couldn't breathe. Ree stepped to the back door and knocked again, louder this time. A moment later, it opened. An elderly woman stood there, frail, thin, her gray hair in a low bun. Her eyes were alert, sharp. "You're not selling anything, are you?" she asked, her tone dry. "No, ma'am," Ree replied. "We're here about Luke's." July 1995. Something flickered across her face, but just for a second. That was a long time ago. "You were listed as administrative staff," Ree said. "You processed personnel entries. Someone entered that nursery under a fake name, the same name that appeared in your clinic 3 years later. You see the problem? I didn't take any babies," she snapped. "No one's accusing you yet," Ree said, "but you were connected to at least 2 of the people involved. And there's a question that needs an answer. Where did the other 2 girls go?" Catherine's eyes shifted to Abigail. "You must be the mother." Abigail didn't speak. She didn't blink. Catherine sighed. "They never should have taken all 3. Ree stepped forward. "Who's they?" But Catherine didn't answer. She turned, walked into the cabin, and left the door open. They followed. Inside was clutter, old books, ceramic angels, dusty picture frames. Ree scanned the walls. No photographs of children. No evidence of a family. Catherine sat at the table and poured herself tea. "They came from a group," she said finally. "A private network, wealthy, powerful, wanted newborns, healthy, untraceable, adoptable. Not for money, for design." Mark's voice cracked. "Design. Couples who couldn't have children or didn't want the process on record," Catherine explained. "We made sure the babies never officially existed. The triplets, they were a mistake, too high profile, but someone pushed it through anyway." "Who?" Abigail asked. Catherine looked tired. "You won't find them. They burned everything, paid everyone who helped. I never even saw their real names. I only saw the cash. And that crib out back, that wasn't for a baby. It was for my conscience." She picked up an old envelope and slid it across the table. Inside, a photograph. 3 infant girls wrapped in different blankets, each tagged with a different last name. "Those are yours," she whispered. "That's the last I ever saw of them." Abigail's hand trembled as she touched the photo. Rose, Lily, Grace. Now, she had a face for each. She stared at the photograph for what felt like hours. 3 babies, their eyes barely open, wrapped in mismatched blankets. They were no longer just names or memories of weightless arms after delivery. They had faces she had missed for 20 years. Each of them had the soft, rounded cheeks of newborns. One wore a tiny yellow cap. One had a faint birthmark on her left eyebrow, and the third, her lips were parted as if caught mid-yawn. "They gave them fake names," Catherine said, her voice hollow. "I wrote them down once, on the back of the photo." Abigail turned it over. Grace Emily Harper, Lily Dana Wells, Rosalise Radley, Emily, Dana, Elise her daughters. "I don't know where they ended up," Catherine went on. "Once they left my hands, I never saw them again. Each went to a different couple, out of state. It was the rule. Spread them out so they wouldn't find each other." Abigail's fingers gripped the edge of the table. "Who arranged it?" Catherine hesitated. "A man named Carr. I only knew him by that name. Always in a suit, clean-cut, polite, but you knew he could make you disappear. He came from Chicago, said he represented the network. I asked, do you know where we can find him?" Catherine looked down. "He's probably dead. He was older even back then. But he never worked alone. There were others, and they're still out there." The next few days were spent in paperwork and silence. Catherine gave a full, sworn affidavit, refiled an official request to reopen the federal case, citing conspiracy, child trafficking, and obstruction of justice. But the system was slow. Abigail couldn't be. She turned her home office into a war room. Whiteboards, threads, copies of the photograph, and the aliases scribbled across maps. She researched every known adoption agency in Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, and Pennsylvania operating in the mid-90s, and she kept coming back to one name: Green Hollow Family Services. The agency had been investigated in 1997 for falsifying adoption records. Charges had been dropped. The founder, a man named Douglas Reeve, had vanished shortly afterward. Abigail dug deeper, only to find he'd been a client at the same clinic where Catherine had worked. Coincidence? She didn't think so. Reobtained a court order to access the agency's sealed records, now in the state archives. 2 weeks later, they had them: redacted files, scattered ledgers, names blacked out. But one entry stood out: infant Dana Wells, placed August 19, 1995. Adoption finalized under special status. Special status: no parental interviews, no background checks, and an address: Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Abigail felt like her legs would give out. They had a lead. The family listed was the Milners, a couple in their 40s who had since divorced. The father had passed away in 2009, but the mother, Carol Milner, still lived in the same house. They drove to Pittsburgh the next morning, Carol Milner was not what Abigail expected. She was tall, commanding, with the poise of someone who once ran church committees and PTA meetings. Her home was spotless, but her eyes, when she saw the visitors at her door, held something unreadable. "Are you Dana's parents?" she asked before Ari could even say a word. Abigail's throat clenched. "We're her biological parents." "Yes." Carol didn't react. She stepped back, holding the door open. "She's not here. She's never been here." "Not really." Ree furrowed his brow. "What do you mean?" "She ran away when she was 16, Carol said. "That was 6 years ago. I haven't seen her since." Abigail blinked. "You never found her?" Carol looked tired. "We tried hired people. Cops. Nothing. She vanished." She led them into the living room. Framed photos lined the mantel. School portraits, birthday parties. A girl with dark curly hair and deep-set eyes in a lily. She was smart but always distant, like she didn't belong, Carol said. She'd ask me questions I couldn't answer. Where she was born, why her birth certificate had a misprint, why I never had a single baby picture of her. When she was 14, she found an old letter, something from the agency. It had the name Green Hollow on it. She confronted me. I denied it, but she saw through me. Abigail's hands trembled. "Do you have anything of hers? Something she left behind?" Carol nodded. She kept a notebook, journals. Mostly, she wrote a lot. I couldn't bring myself to throw them away. She disappeared into the hallway and returned with a battered green notebook. Abigail opened it with reverence. The first page said, "I know I don't belong here. Something is missing. Sometimes I dream I'm not alone, like there are others girls who look like me, talk like me. Sisters, maybe. I don't know who I am, but I'm going to find out." Abigail's tears spilled freely. Inside the notebook were sketches. 3 girls holding hands. Drawings of a hospital room. A woman with a birthmark above her eye. Abigail touched the image. That was the birthmark she'd had removed years ago. She remembered me. Abigail whispered. She felt it. Carol corrected, even without knowing. The last entry was dated 2 days before Dana vanished. "I found the name Elise Radley on an online forum. She looks like me. She's in college somewhere in Illinois. I think I'm going to find her." Abigail's heart skipped. Elise Rose, she had already begun the search. Ree pulled up a college directory. Elise Radley, art student, junior, listed under a scholarship foundation. Applied arts, female. They drove back to Illinois that same night. Elise was working in the Student Art Center. She was tall, with auburn curls and a quiet intensity. She looked up when they entered. Her eyes settled on Abigail like magnets. "I know you," she said, stunned. "From a dream, from somewhere." Abigail choked back a sob. "You know me because I'm your mother." Elise swayed. I stepped forward, gently explaining. DNA, names, photographs, stories, everything Catherine and Teresa had told them. Elise didn't interrupt. She just listened, her face pale. Then she said something no one expected. "Someone else came to see me. Last year, a girl said we looked alike. She asked me about Green Hollow, about our birth records. She had this notebook." Abigail gasped. "Dana, that was Dana." Elise nodded. "I told her I wanted to help, but she left the next morning, said she had one more place to go." "Where?" Ari asked urgently. "She said something about going back to where it started." Elise replied. Abigail's voice was faint. "St. Luke's." But St. Luke's no longer existed. The hospital had been torn down in 2010 after a fire destroyed part of the upper floors. Only the lower structure remained, now fenced off and abandoned. They drove there that night. The building was cold, the floor scattered with broken glass and moss. The nursery wing was just a hollow frame, but one room still had its number above the door. Room 302. There, in the corner, was a name scratched into the wall. Dana Wells. 2014. She had been there, and she had left something behind. A pendant, silver, 3 circles linked together. Abigail picked it up and held it close to her chest. A quiet promise whispered through her mind. "We were together once." Abigail held the silver pendant in her palm, her fingers trembling around its weight. 3 linked rings, so simple, so small, and yet it said more than words ever could. Dana had been here. She had stood in this crumbling hospital wing, surrounded by decay, and left a sign, a symbol, a message only her sisters would understand if they ever came looking. "She never gave up," Abigail whispered. Mark stepped behind her, gently placing his hand on her shoulder. "Just like you." Removed through the dust-covered space carefully, his flashlight catching remnants of shattered glass, peeling wallpaper, and abandoned furniture. "If Dana came here in 2014, he said, we need to find out what happened to her afterward. She didn't just disappear. They contacted local law enforcement again, missing persons, surveillance footage, but there was nothing. No Jane Doe reports from that time, no bodies, no arrests. It was as if Dana had walked into that building and simply vanished. But Abigail knew better. Dana was still alive. She had to be. And then finally, a break. 2 days later, Ree received a call from an officer in Dayton, Ohio. He had come across their inquiry about Dana Wells and connected it to an unusual tip received years earlier, a girl who had shown up at a women's shelter in 2014, calling herself Lily, with no ID and a refusal to explain where she came from. She stayed for 2 weeks, then left suddenly. She said she was looking for someone. The shelter's director told them over the phone. Another girl, she showed me a drawing, 2 girls standing beside a third. She said they were sisters. We thought maybe she'd been trafficked. She wouldn't stay long enough for anyone to help. Abigail asked, "Do you have the drawing?" There was a pause. "We actually do. We keep records just in case. I can email it to you." The email arrived a few minutes later. Abigail opened it. There they were, 3 young women holding hands. One had a scar above her eyebrow. One had a pendant around her neck, and one had eyes that mirrored Abigail's perfectly. The style matched the sketches from Dana's notebook. She had drawn this too. Dana had left a breadcrumb. Retraced the shelter's visitor log. Dana had left behind a P.O. box number in Pennsylvania for mail forwarding. It was inactive, but it had been rented under an alias. M. Carr. Mark said sharply. "That's the name Catherine gave us, the man who coordinated the disappearances, which means Dana found something," replied, "or someone." They drove to Pennsylvania again. The post office confirmed the box had been rented in cash. The clerk didn't remember the person. It had been years, but there was a single package still waiting in the back, undelivered due to expiration. Presented his ID, signed off the release, and handed the sealed manila envelope to Abigail. Inside, there was a letter. It began, "If you're reading this, I probably didn't make it back. My name is Dana Wells. I think my real name is Lily Jennings. I believe I'm one of 3 sisters who were taken from a hospital in 1995. I've been trying to piece this together for 2 years now, ever since I found the truth buried in a box of my childhood things. I've met one sister, Elise Radley. She's alive, she's kind, and she's an artist. I didn't tell her everything because I was afraid. I didn't want to put her in danger. But there's something more. I found a name, Martin Carr. He's the one who arranged the adoptions, and I think he's still alive. I found a private address linked to his name under a shell corporation in upstate Vermont. I'm going there. If I don't come back, someone needs to know what I found. Please find Elise. Find our mother. Tell them I never stopped looking." Abigail broke down. She pressed the letter to her chest and sobbed silently, the kind of cry that comes from someplace so deep it has no sound. Mark wrapped his arms around her. Didn't say anything. He didn't need to. They all knew where they were going next. Vermont. The drive was long, silent, heavy with anticipation. The address Dana had written led them to a remote property. Near the Canadian border, dense woods, a gravel road, a high iron gate, a faded mailbox that read M. Carr. Reparked just outside the gate and checked his weapon. "Let me go first," he said. They followed slowly, careful not to disturb anything. The house at the end of the path was large but run down. No cars outside. One window boarded. The front door hung crooked on its hinges. Knocked, no answer. He motioned for Mark to stay with Abigail, then entered. The house was dark, smelled of mold and wood smoke. Called out. No response. He checked every room methodically. Then, finally, in the basement, he found it. A room with medical files, photographs, ledgers, a corkboard covered in names, paper-clipped photos of babies, a file labeled Jennings Infant Triplets. Called Abigail down. She entered slowly, her breath catching at the sight. Her daughter's names were typed, underlined, filed like inventory. The air was cold, the walls lined with shelves of documentation that should have never existed. "Who keeps this?" Mark muttered. "Why?" Then found something else. A journal. It wasn't Carr's. It was Dana's. "I made it. I found him. He's not who I thought he was. He's not just some trafficker. He thinks what he did was right, that he saved us from poverty, from bad homes. He's delusional, but he's careful. I don't think he'll let me leave. If you find this, I'm sorry I failed." Abigail's knees buckled. Mark caught her. Dana had been here, but she was gone again. Found fingerprints, confirmed recent activity, but no sign of Carr. Was either dead or he had vanished once more. They left the property and contacted state police. The house was declared a crime scene, but so far, it held only ghosts. Back home, Elise and Lily Rose and Grace sat in Abigail's living room. 2 daughters, side by side. One was sketching a pendant. The other was quietly scrolling through. An old photo album of Abigail and Mark's lives before the storm, and Abigail stood in the doorway, watching them, waiting, because one was still missing. Somewhere, out there, Lily Dana was waiting to be found, and she would not stop until she brought all 3 of her girls home. Autumn arrived early that year. Golden leaves swept across Abigail's porch like soft confetti. The wind had a bite to it, and with it came the kind of silence that made you listen to your own thoughts a little more. Inside, the house was filled with sounds Abigail hadn't heard in decades. Laughter, clinking mugs, pages turning, and, occasionally, the muffled hum of a memory trying to surface. Elise and Lily Rose and Grace were adjusting to the truth. Slowly, Carefully, some days, they spent hours talking, comparing childhood memories, dreams, drawings. Other days, they barely said a word, just sat side by side on the back porch with blankets across their laps, the silence saying more than conversation ever could. Abigail didn't push them. She cooked, she cleaned. She found herself folding laundry that wasn't hers just to keep her hands busy. She wasn't just a mother now. She was a stranger trying to feel like one again. But something kept gnawing at her. Dana was out there, somewhere, and every minute that passed felt like a betrayal. Ree had put out a nationwide alert with Dana's real name, her alias, her description, everything. But there were no new leads, no hits on facial recognition, no credit card activity, no cell signal history beyond 2015. It was as though she'd walked into the shadows and stayed there. Then one night, the phone rang. It was nearly 2 a.m. Abigail answered with a dry throat and pounding heart. A man's voice, calm, gentle. "Mrs. Jennings." "Yes," she said, gripping the receiver. "Who is this?" "My name is Robert Landry. I think I may have met your daughter." Abigail sat up straighter. "Where?" "I run a church shelter in Vermont," he said. "We don't report every visitor. A lot of people come through here who don't want to be found. But this girl, she arrived last winter, said her name was Lily, had a scar on her wrist, and a journal. She wouldn't show it to anyone, but she wrote in it every night." Abigail's voice caught. "Do you know where she is now?" "I'm afraid I don't," he said. "She left after a snowstorm, left a bundle of things behind, mostly clothes, but there was one thing I couldn't throw away." A pause. "She left a letter. Said if anyone ever came asking to give it to them. I was watching the news last night. I saw your story. I think it's meant for you." The next day, they drove 6 hours straight. The shelter sat at the edge of a frozen lake, flanked by tall pine trees. The pastor, a kind-eyed man in his 60s, handed over the letter without a word. Abigail opened it slowly. "Dear Mom," it began. "If someone's found this, it means you didn't stop looking. I hope that means Elise and Ellie are with you. I hope you told them everything. I've spent so long imagining you, wondering what your voice sounds like, what your hugs feel like, whether you still celebrate birthdays in threes. I'm sorry I couldn't stay. I wanted to, but I had to keep going. There's more to this. I think Carr was just a puppet. Someone else is pulling the strings. I've been following trails, names, places, old nurses, people who vanished after 95. There's a woman, her name is Evelyn Sutter. I think she was the last person who saw all three of us together. She lives in Oregon, and I'm going to find her. I love you. I don't remember you, but I do." Dana Abigail's hand clutched the page, wrinkling it as she brought it to her chest. Ree was already on the phone before they reached the car. Within 2 days, he had Evelyn Sutter's last known address, an assisted living center in Eugene, Oregon. She was 79 years old and fading fast. They flew out immediately. Evelyn was in a wheelchair by the window, a thick shawl over her shoulders, staring blankly at the rain-streaked glass. Her chart said dementia, limited cognition, but Ree believed in trying. He crouched beside her and spoke gently. "Mrs. Sutter, we're looking for someone. Dana, she came to see you. We think." She didn't respond. Abigail sat beside her. "You helped my daughters once. I think you were a nurse in Illinois. St. Luke's." Evelyn blinked slowly. Her mouth twitched, then a whisper. "3 of them. One cried all the time." Abigail leaned forward. "Yes, that was Grace. You remember." Evelyn nodded faintly. "They said not to ask questions, but I knew they weren't orphans. They had a mother." She looked at Abigail now, more clearly. "You," Abigail took her hand. "Do you remember a girl, Dana, coming to see you?" Evelyn looked down at her lap, then slowly, almost painfully, lifted a small tin box from the table beside her. Inside was a photograph. Dana standing on a hill, her hand on Evelyn's shoulder. "She found me," Evelyn said. "Came last year. Asked everything. I told her what I knew about the van, about the woman who took them, about the third child, the one they didn't want placed." "What do you mean?" I asked. "They were going to keep one for a client," Evelyn said. "Someone private, not part of the system. No files, no questions, just pay and take." Abigail's throat dried. "Which one?" "I don't know," Evelyn said. "But the woman, she had a birthmark on her hand. Big, purple, covered it with makeup. But I saw it, rewrote everything down. She left a few days after that," Evelyn added. "Said she was heading to Montana, to a cabin. Said she found a name in an old ledger. H. Whitlow, H. Whitlow," Ree repeated. "Got it." They thanked Evelyn, who had begun to doze off. By the time they left, back home, Ree began digging. After 3 days, he found a cabin property purchased in 1996 under the name Harriet Whitlow, registered with a shell company based out of Wyoming. The woman had never paid taxes, no ID renewals, no socialmedia, no traffic tickets, but the property taxes were current, paid in cash by mail annually. "Someone's still out there," Ree said, "and she might have Dana." They didn't wait. It was snowing when they reached the cabin, Montana's mountains looming behind them, endless and cold. The land was silent, no cars, no footprints. The gate was rusted shut. Recut the chain. They approached the cabin carefully. No electricity. Smoke rising faintly from the chimney. He knocked once, then twice. Nothing. Then a woman opened the door. White hair, sharp eyes. A faint purple stain across the back of her right hand, barely hidden beneath her sleeve. "Yes," she said coolly. Ree showed his badge. "Ma'am, we're looking for someone. A young woman named Dana Wells. She may have come here in the last few months." The woman didn't blink. "I don't know anyone by that name." Abigail stepped forward. "My daughter came here," she said. "She followed the truth all the way to your door. Please, if you know anything, just tell us." The woman looked from Ari to Abigail, then to Mark, standing silently in the snow. And then she said, quietly, almost too softly too, "Here, she's not here anymore." Abigail's heart stilled. "Then where is she?" The woman stepped aside and pointed to the small wooden shed at the back of the cabin. "She left you something," she said. "I think you should see it." Snow crunched beneath their boots as Abigail, Mark, and Ree approached the weathered shed behind the cabin. The wind bit hard at their coats, the trees swaying in the distance like silent witnesses. Abigail's heart was pounding so loudly she could barely hear Ree's voice as he whispered, "Let me go in first." But she didn't stop. She stepped forward, hand reaching out for the rusted handle, fingers stiff with cold and fear. She opened the door. The air inside was dry and still. There were no tools, no firewood, just a small table, a single wooden chair, and, on top of the table, a thick envelope sealed with wax. Next to it, a cassette recorder, old battery-powered. A folded piece of paper taped to the top read, "Play me first." Abigail looked at Ree, who nodded. She pressed the button. The recorder clicked, then hissed. Then a voice filled the space. It was Dana. "Mom, Dad, I hope it's you who finds this." Her voice began, slightly shaky but strong. "If it's someone else, please get this to them." Abigail's knees buckled, and Mark caught her as they lowered themselves onto the bench inside. Dana's voice continued. "I've been here for almost a week. I found her, Harriet Whit. Her name isn't real, but she's the last link in the chain. She wasn't just part of the system. She was the client, the one who ordered one of us for herself. She worked in politics, had money, power, and a reputation to protect. She couldn't risk a public adoption, so she paid someone to erase every trace." Abigail covered her mouth, eyes brimming with tears. "I don't think she ever planned on letting me leave." Dana's voice went on. "She thought I was someone else when I first arrived. Some reporter, maybe. But when I showed her the pendant, she froze. She knew. She recognized me. She admitted it." The tape clicked softly before continuing. "She said she didn't take me. She took Grace, but the woman who delivered the baby changed the plan. She gave her Lily instead me. She never knew the truth until now." Abigail's chest tightened. Mark leaned in closer, listening with every part of himself. "I was the daughter she kept," Dana's voice said softly. "The one meant to be raised by a stranger in the woods. I was the child who cried so much she almost gave me back. But then she didn't. She changed my name, moved me to 4 different homes, and when I was 5, she sent me to live with a distant cousin to cover her trail. I grew up thinking I'd been abandoned." A long pause. "She never hit me, but she never loved me. I was her secret, her failure. I found her name on a clinic ledger by accident. Everything unraveled from there." The tape clicked again. Quieter now. "I told her I was going to leave. She begged me not to, said I would destroy her. But I didn't care. I didn't come this far to stop." Dana's voice began to break. "She locked me in this shed for 3 days. Took my phone, took everything. But she didn't know about the recorder or the spare batteries. I had it hidden in my coat." The silence on the tape lingered for several seconds. "I don't know what's going to happen next. If you're hearing this, either I got out, or I didn't." Another pause. "I want you to know something. I've never felt more whole than when I met Elise, when I looked into her eyes and saw my own face, my own pain, when I found Ellie's photos online and saw the pendant I remembered from my dreams, when I wrote in my journal and imagined you reading it someday. Mom," her voice trembled, "you were always with me, even when I didn't know your name." The tape clicked one final time, then silence. Abigail stayed seated, hands clutched over her heart, her face soaked in tears. Mark was still, his jaw clenched, eyes staring into the dim wood grain. Ree stepped forward and picked up the sealed envelope. Inside, a photograph. Dana, standing at the edge of a river, smiling. A second envelope contained the names of everyone Harriet had worked with, handwritten, dated, detailed. Ree read it carefully. "This is enough to open a federal case," he said, but Abigail didn't care about courtrooms. She cared about one thing. "Where is she?" she asked Harriet Whitlow when they returned to the house. Harriet sat calmly by the fire, as if she'd been waiting. "She left 2 days ago. Took my car, said if I tried to follow, she'd call the authorities. I thought she was bluffing. She wasn't. I know that now," Harriet said flatly. "She said she was going west, somewhere she'd seen in a dream. I don't know where." "You're lying," Abigail said, stepping forward. her voice suddenly sharp. You know more than you're saying. Harriet looked at her. If you think I don't regret it, you're wrong. I didn't know what I was doing in 1995. I thought I was saving a life. That's how they framed it. No one told me the babies had a mother who wanted them. Abigail's voice cracked. You think that makes it better? No, Harriet whispered. But I know what it makes me. They left her sitting there as the state police arrived to take her in for questioning. Back in the car, returned to Abigail and Mark. I'll put out a new alert. Her image, her voice, everything. But if Dana's still running, it's because she doesn't believe she's safe, not even now. Elise and Ellie were waiting when they returned. Elise ran to her mother, pulling her into a hug. Ellie stood beside them, quiet, protective. Was it her? Ellie asked. Was she really in that cabin? Abigail nodded. She was there. She left us a message. They played the tape that night, sitting in a circle in the living room, fire crackling in the hearth. The girls listened without moving. When it ended, no one spoke. Then, Elise said, "We'll find her." Ellie added, "We're not losing her again." Abigail wiped her eyes. "We're not, I promise." And then, for the first time in decades, she took all 3 hospital bracelets Rose Lily and Grace Ann, placed them beside the photograph Dana had left. 3 names, 3 girls, almost reunited. The search was not over, but now they knew the final chapter was near. The flyer went live on a Thursday afternoon, a still image of Dana taken from the cassette's shed photo, paired with a short, edited clip of her voice from the tape. Had carefully trimmed the message to avoid sensitive details but kept her tone, her urgency, her truth. The video was titled, "Missing Triplet Found 20 Years Later. One Sister Still Lost." It spread faster than anyone expected. Local news picked it up, then regional. Within 48 hours, it was on national TV. Abigail sat in her living room, surrounded by reporters she'd declined to speak to, emails she hadn't opened, and voicemails she couldn't bring herself to hear. But one voicemail changed everything. It came from a motel clerk in Idaho, a small town named Sandpoint. There was a girl, he said. She checked in last night, looked just like the girl on TV. Cash, gave a fake name, but she forgot her scarf at the counter, and inside it was this. He emailed a photo. It was the pendant, the same silver circles. Abigail nearly collapsed. She called Ree immediately. By that evening, they were on a flight. They arrived in Sandpoint at sunrise. The motel room was empty, cleaned out, but the clerk had more than a scarf. He had a notebook the girl had accidentally left in the room drawer, one with the initials DW etched on the inside cover. The last entry was dated 2 days prior. "I'm so close. I know they're out there. I saw the video. I heard her voice, Mom, Elise, Ellie, but I don't know if I'm ready. What if I'm just the broken one? What if they don't want me? I'm scared, but I'm going tomorrow morning. There's a shelter in Missoula. I'll start there." Missoula, other 2 hours by road. They didn't stop for food or rest. Ree kept calling ahead, and by the time they reached the shelter, the staff had already pulled the logs. "Yes," the director said, pointing to the intake sheet. "She was here, arrived this morning, said she needed a shower and a meal. We asked her name. She hesitated, then said, Dana Jennings." Abigail's eyes welled up. "Is she here now?" The woman shook her head. "She left not long after, said she had someone to find." She seemed nervous, kept looking at her phone. "We offered her a ride. She declined." Ree looked at Abigail. "If she's trying to find you, she's on her way back to Illinois." They returned home that night, exhausted. Elise and Ellie were waiting, curled up on the living room couch like sisters who'd known each other forever. Abigail stared at the front door for hours, hoping, praying that Dana would appear. But she didn't, not that night, not the next. But on the 3rd day, she did. It was late afternoon. Rain fell gently against the windows. Abigail was folding laundry in the dining room when she heard the front door open. Mark had gone to the store. The girls were upstairs. She turned around. There she was. Dana stood in the doorway, soaked through, hair clinging to her face, backpack slung over one shoulder, her eyes wide with something that looked like fear, or maybe disbelief. They stared at each other for several seconds. Abigail dropped the towel. "She was holding high, Mom," Dana whispered. Abigail crossed the room before she could say another word. She wrapped her arms around her daughter, the one she had dreamed of every day for 20 years, and held her tighter than she'd held anything in her life. Dana didn't cry at first, but when Abigail whispered, "You're home now, baby, you're home," the flood broke. They sank to the floor together, sobbing in each other's arms. Upstairs, Elise and Ellie heard the noise. They came rushing down the stairs. When they saw her, truly saw her, there was a pause, a moment of silence, of recognition. Then all 3 sisters ran to each other. They collided in the middle of the hallway, airs, arms, laughter, all tangled. Together, for several minutes, no one said a word. There was nothing to say. Just the sound of something broken, finally being put back together. Later that night, as rain tapped gently against the roof, they sat at the kitchen table, the 3, girls shoulder to shoulder, sharing tea and stories and pieces of their fractured lives. Dana told them everything, about the woman who raised her without love, about the locked rooms, the secrets, the names she wasn't supposed to ask, about Evelyn Sutter, about the shed, about the man named Carr, who she now believed had faked his own death years earlier. I found a lead, she said, right before I left the cabin. I didn't know if I could trust it, but I think Carr is alive. Abigail stiffened, where Dana took out a slip of paper. A fishing lodge near Lake Superior. He bought it in 2002. He changed his name, but the property tax records didn't lie. It's isolated, remote, but he's there. I think he's still hiding, watching. Restudied the name. Ralph Simmons, it said. He nodded. I'll handle it, but Dana put a hand on his I want to come. Abigail looked up sharply. You don't have to do this anymore. I do, Dana said, for all of us. The next morning, Dana and federal agents raided the cabin near Lake Superior. Carr didn't resist. He was older, thinner, but just as dangerous. In his den, they found hard drives, microfilm, handwritten notes, lists, names, dates, payment, ledgers, most damning of all, records from the original 1995 abduction. He had documented everything, every bribe, every nurse, every baby. The FBI took over the case. Carr was charged with conspiracy, child trafficking, obstruction, and falsification of legal records. More arrests followed. 2 retired doctors, a former board member from St. Luke's, and 1 still active judge who had signed off on falsified adoption papers. The story rocked the nation, but none of that mattered to Abigail. What mattered was what happened next. That winter, on a quiet December morning, Abigail stood in her kitchen, stirring cocoa. Her girls were in the living room, setting up the Christmas tree together for the first time in their lives. Elise was untangling lights. Ellie, forever organized, was labeling ornament boxes. Dana sat cross-legged on the floor, sketching something in her notebook. Okay, Dana said, smiling. Now it really feels like home. Abigail wiped her hands and stood in the doorway. You 3 are home, she said softly. That's all that matters. The girls turned to her. Come sit with us, Mom, Elise called out, and as Abigail joined her daughters, the 3 girls wrapped their arms around her, their laughter echoing through the house like a song no one had heard in 20 years. A song of return, a song of truth, a song of family. The snow fell gently on the front lawn of the Jennings home, dusting the hedges and porch like powdered sugar. Inside, the fire crackled steadily, and the scent of cinnamon and pine floated through the air. It was December 24th, exactly 5 months since Dana returned. The tree sparkled in the corner of the living room, adorned, not with matching ornaments, but with pieces of 3 separate childhoods. Elise's tiny hand-painted bulbs from art school, Ellie's laced angels sewn by her foster grandmother, and a single crocheted star that Dana had kept from her earliest memories, tucked in a shoebox. For years, without knowing why, now it sat proudly at the top of the tree. The sisters had moved in weeks ago. Elise withdrew from her university to finish her final year online. Ellie transferred her job at the design firm to a remote position. And Dana wasn't rushing into anything yet. She was still healing. They all were, but they were healing together. Upstairs, Abigail opened the closet in what had once been the nursery. The room that had been painted pale yellow in 1995 but never used. She ran her hand along the edge of the crib, which she had refused to sell or repaint all these years. The mobile above it still hung limp, faded from sunlight. She touched it gently, and it twirled once before slowing to a stop. Mark appeared in the doorway, holding a wrapped box. She love it, he said. Abigail took it, pressing it to her chest. I still don't believe it sometimes. I still woke up thinking I've dreamed it all. He smiled. Then let's keep dreaming. Downstairs, the girls were setting the table, 3 candles, 3 folded napkins. Dana was humming something under her breath, a tune she said had always haunted her, though she could never place where it came from. Abigail suspected she had heard it in the hospital during those brief seconds after birth, something on the nurse's radio or from a hallway lullaby. A whisper from the beginning of her life. Rhea arrived just before dinner, a warm scarf around his neck, a weathered smile on his face. You sure you're not tired of us yet? Abigail teased as she let him in. Not a chance, he said. I've been assigned to cold case reform now because of this case. They're launching a new task force, using your story as a benchmark. You deserve that, Mark said, clapping him on the shoulder. Rhea's eyes drifted to the girls. They're okay, they're getting there, Abigail said. Piece by piece. Later that evening, after dinner and cocoa and a lot of laughter, the family gathered in the living room. Dana stood up, holding a notebook in her hands. I've been writing something, she said, her voice soft. I wasn't sure if I'd read it aloud, but tonight feels like the right time. She opened to a page and began. For a long time, I didn't know who I was. I had names that didn't belong to me, memories that didn't make sense, and a silence inside me that nothing could fill. I lived like a shadow, half here, half searching. But then I found a thread, a single strand of truth, and I followed it. She looked at Abigail. It led me to a woman I had only ever seen in dreams. A woman who lit 3 candles every year on a windowsill. Even when the world told her to move on. A woman who never stopped saying our names. She turned to her sisters. And it led me to you, my mirror, my anchor, my fire. You pulled me from the dark without even knowing it. She closed the book and smiled, a tear slipping down her cheek. Thank you for waiting for me. The room was still. Then Ellie crossed to her and hugged her tightly. Elise followed, wrapping her arms around both of them. Abigail stepped forward, her hand on all 3 of their shoulders. Reese stood quietly in the corner, watching with eyes that glistened. Mark turned off the main lights. The girls stood near the window, their silhouettes glowing against the white snowfall outside, and for the first time in 20 years, every piece of Abigail's heart was home. The following week, they received a letter not from a court or a journalist, but from a young woman in Oregon. Her name was Chloe. She had watched the story on the news, had recognized the name Green Hollow from her own adoption records. She believed she was another child taken in the same operation. Abigail forwarded it to a new case, a new beginning. One by one, others might find their way home. In January, Elise enrolled in a trauma-informed art therapy program. Ellie began designing a project called The Thread, a nonprofit for reconnecting separated siblings and uncovering sealed adoption files. Dana joined her, offering her story to help train volunteers and staff. And Abigail began writing, again. For the first time since 1995, her memoir would be called 3 Names in the Dark. Because that's what her daughters had been. 3 tiny lights lost in shadows. But not anymore. Not ever again. One morning, in early spring, the girls took a walk together down to the lake near the house. It had thawed, and small flowers had started to poke through the thawing grass. They brought a single candle, lit it together, and placed it gently on the water's surface. It floated slowly, flickering against the ripples. The girls stood in silence. Then Dana whispered, "We were never really gone, just waiting to be found."